It was a bitterly cold Tuesday evening in late November, the kind of night where the frost on the windows felt as sharp as the air outside. Bruce Hardy sat alone in his office, the steady hum of fluorescent lights providing the only companionship as he skimmed through the final pages of a contract due by Friday. Normally meticulous, Bruce had found his motivation slipping lately, as thin and fragile as the icy patterns etched on the glass panes. With a sigh, he stacked the documents into a neat pile and slid them into the sleek mahogany cabinet behind his desk. The lock clicked softly as he turned the key, a sense of finality in the gesture. Leaning back in his chair, Bruce ran a hand through his thinning blonde hair, the gesture more habitual than conscious. At 38, Bruce was a man who strived to project an image of success. Tailored suits a touch too extravagant for his salary, shoes polished to a mirror shine, and hair meticulously combed in a futile attempt to mask the slow retreat of his hairline. Yet tonight, his mind was far from contracts or appearances. It was on her, Carrie, the woman waiting for him at a downtown hotel. She wasn't his wife, Bridget. No, Carrie was something else entirely, a fiery escape from the monotony of a decade-long marriage. Where Bridget was steady and familiar, Carrie was wild and electrifying. The very thought of her sent a rush of adrenaline through him, a spark of youthful recklessness he hadn't felt in years. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his reverie. He glanced at the screen. Suite 606. Can't wait for you, face blowing against it. A grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. Carrie had a way of making him feel like he was 20 again. Carefree, invincible, unstoppable. Shrugging on his cashmere overcoat, Bruce paused to check his reflection in the office window. The pale, angular face that stared back at him bore a smug expression, his grin almost wolfish. By the time he reached the parking garage, the anticipation thrummed through his veins, making his steps light. The faint echo of his shoes on the concrete floor blended with the low hum of the overhead lights. He strolled toward his car, mind already drifting to the promise of the night ahead. He never saw it coming. One moment, he was fumbling with his car keys, the mental image of Carrie vivid in his thoughts. The next, a bone-crunching blow smashed into his face, snapping his head to the side. Pain exploded behind his eyes, hot and blinding, as he stumbled into a concrete pillar. Blood poured from his nose, staining the lapel of his expensive overcoat. What the? Was all he managed to croak before a sledgehammer-like fist drove into his gut, knocking the air from his lungs. His knees buckled, and he crumpled to the cold, damp floor of the parking garage. Dazed and gasping for breath, Bruce barely registered the shadowed figure looming over him. A man, broad-shouldered and imposing, clad in a dark wool coat and leather gloves. He looked like he'd stepped out of a noir film, his presence commanding and sinister. The man crouched beside him, his voice unsettlingly calm. Don't try to talk just yet. You've got quite a bit of blood running down your face. Not your best look, Bruce, but don't worry. I'm here to help. In a way. Before Bruce could process the words, a sharp slap cracked across his face, snapping him into sharper awareness. Wake up, the man said, his tone no longer calm but laced with a hard edge. We need to have a little chat. Blinking through the haze of pain, Bruce managed to stammer. Who are you? The man tilted his head, as though genuinely considering the question. Who am I? He repeated, his voice laced with dark amusement. Let's just say I'm someone who knows a lot about you. Your job, your family, your dirty little secret. A cold dread seeped into Bruce's chest as the man leaned in closer, his lips curling into a smile that was anything but friendly. And most importantly, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, I know about Carrie. Bruce's stomach turned violently, while rising as the words hit him like a freight train. Oh yeah, the man said, his tone sharpening like a blade. You thought you were pretty slick, didn't you? Sneaking around, meeting her in hotels. Suite 606, right? Sound familiar? Bruce began, but the man cut him off with another slap. No, you don't talk. Not yet. This is my show, Bruce, and I ask the questions, grabbing Bruce by the lapels of his coat. The man hauled him upright until their faces were inches apart. The sharp tang of leather and something metallic, blood perhaps, hung in the air between them. "Do you know who I am?" the man asked, his voice low and dangerous. Bruce shook his head weakly, his breath hitching. The man smirked, his dark eyes glinting with satisfaction. "I'm Jack. Jack Hogan. Does that name ring a bell?" Bruce's blood ran cold. He'd heard Carrie mention her husband before in passing, as though he were little more than an afterthought, a distant figure in her life. But now, staring into Jack Hogan's eyes, Bruce realized just how wrong he'd been. Jack released his grip, letting Bruce collapse back against the pillar. His head thudded against the concrete, pain blooming anew as he slumped to the ground. "You look like hell," Jack said mockingly, pacing a few steps away before turning back. "But don't worry, it's nothing compared to what I could have done. I'm keeping things civil for now." Bruce struggled to form words, his mind sluggish and fogged with fear. "I didn't mean—" Jack's humorless laugh cut him off. "Don't even try. I've got everything I need, photos, dates, times. I even know about Suite 606. The accusation hung heavy in the air as Jack crouched down in front of Bruce again, his voice calm but ice cold. "Now listen carefully," he said, locking eyes with Bruce. "This isn't just a warning. It's the start of something you're not ready for. Bruce's reckoning." Bruce barely registered the cold bite of the tiled floor as he lay slumped against it, blood trickling from his nose and staining his shirt. His chest heaved, each breath labored, his mind reeling from Jack's words more than the punches. Jack stood over him, his dark eyes alight with a cruel, icy fury. His voice was deceptively calm, laced with venom. "You've had your fun, Bruce," he said, his lips curling into a sharp, humorless smile. "But now it's time for consequences. You see, I don't take kindly to some two-bit lawyer screwing my wife and thinking he can walk away without paying the price." Bruce flinched at the word screwing, his face twisting in shame. Jack crouched down, his tone softening to something almost intimate, yet dripping with menace. "I've done my homework on you," he continued, his voice low but unyielding. "You work for Hamilton and Ross, right? Decent firm. Good reputation. A little out of your league, maybe, but you've been skating by. And guess what, Bruce? Hogan Industries," he gestured to himself with mock grandeur, "is one of your firm's biggest clients." The pit in Bruce's stomach deepened, the implications hitting like a freight train. "Here's the deal," Jack said, his voice hardening. "By the end of January, you're going to resign. Pack up your little desk, write your resignation letter, and vanish. I don't care where you go, as long as it's far from here. Because if I see your smug face anywhere near the city after that," Jack leaned in close, his breath hot against Bruce's ear, "tonight will feel like a warm hug compared to what comes next." Bruce's throat was dry, his thoughts scrambling for a way out. Every possible path felt blocked, every avenue cut off by Jack's steely determination. "Why?" Bruce managed to croak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Jack's smile returned, sharp and cruel. "Because it's personal," he said. "You didn't just screw some random woman. You screwed my wife. While I'm stuck dealing with the fallout of her betrayal, I figured you could share in the misery. Fair's fair, right?" Bruce said nothing, his face pale and clammy. "But wait," Jack said, rising to his feet. "There's more." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a large envelope, tossing it into Bruce's lap. "Inside, you'll find a little parting gift, some cash, a plane ticket to Mexico City, and photos of your activities with Carrie. Consider it a starter kit for your new life." Bruce stared at the envelope, his hands trembling. What do you want me to do with this?" Jack's tone turned almost casual. "You'll be delivering it to Carrie," he said. "You're going to meet her at the Hilton, just like you planned. But instead of your usual routine, you'll hand her that envelope, tell her it's over, and walk away. No tears, no drama. A clean break. And if I don't? Bruce asked, though his voice lacked any real defiance. Jack's smile vanished. He leaned in again, his tone colder than ever. If you don't, I'll make sure every person in your life, your boss, your wife, your kids, sees what you've been up to. And trust me, Bruce, I've got the receipts. The weight of the threat pressed down on Bruce like a vice. Defeated, he nodded weakly, too broken to argue. Good, Jack said, straightening his coat. Now, go clean yourself up. You've got a date to cancel. With that, he strode toward the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the silence, leaving Bruce slumped and shattered. Bruce sat in his car for what felt like an eternity, his bloodied face reflected dimly in the windshield. His mind was a storm of regret and fear, every thought spiraling into darker territory. He didn't want to go to the Hilton. He didn't want to face Carrie. But Jack's threats loomed large, leaving him no choice. With trembling hands, he started the engine and drove downtown. The city lights blurred through his watery vision, the world outside feeling surreal and distant. When he pulled into the Hilton's parking lot, he sat there for several minutes, trying to summon the courage to move. Finally, he grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat and headed inside. Room 66. His knock was weak, barely audible over the pounding in his ears. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Carrie. Her face lit up at first, warmth flooding her expression. "Bruce," she exclaimed, her voice soft and inviting. But then her gaze fell on his swollen, bloodied face. Her smile vanished. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What happened to you?" Bruce pushed past her, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. "I ran into some trouble," he muttered. "Trouble? What kind of trouble? Who did this to you?" She reached for his face, but he stepped back, avoiding her touch. "It doesn't matter," he said, his voice hollow. "What matters is that this," he gestured between them, "is over." Carrie blinked, her face a mask of confusion. "Over? What are you talking about?" Bruce finally looked at her, his voice trembling with anger and despair. "Jack knows. Your husband. He knows everything." Her face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "He doesn't. He can't. He can," Bruce interrupted bitterly, thrusting the envelope into her hands. "And he does? He gave me this to give to you. Photos, times, places. He's done, Carrie. With you. With this. With everything." Carrie opened the envelope with trembling fingers, her face crumpling as she sifted through the damning evidence. Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God," she murmured. "Bruce, I didn't mean for this to happen." Bruce let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't mean for what to happen? The affair or getting caught?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. Jack, he's not just going to leave me. He'll destroy me." "Sounds familiar," Bruce muttered, his tone icy. Carrie looked up at him. Panic etched across her features. "What did he say to you?" Bruce took a step closer, his voice low and cold. "He said I have until the end of January to quit my job and leave the city. He said if I don't, he'll make sure everyone in my life knows what I've done. My wife, my kids, everyone." Carrie's tears came harder now, her body trembling as the full weight of Jack's retaliation became clear. Bruce stood there, silent and still, watching as the woman who had once been his escape now became his ruin. The weight of consequences. Bruce's voice trembled as he spoke, his words barely audible. "My wife, my kids, my boss. Everyone knows about this." Carrie stared at him, her lips parted in shock, her breath hitching in disbelief. "He can't do that, he wouldn't." Bruce's grim smirk cut her off. "Oh, he would. Trust me, Carrie. He's not bluffing." Carrie collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her trembling hands. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. That's your problem, Bruce snapped, turning toward the door. I've done my part. He paused, glancing back at her with a mix of anger and pity. Good luck explaining this to Jack. And for the record, his tone sharpened, I wish I'd never met you. Without waiting for a response, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The drive home stretched endlessly, every mile weighed down by exhaustion and dread. By the time Bruce pulled into his driveway, he felt hollow, too drained to care how he looked or what Bridget, his wife, might say. The kitchen light was still on when Bruce stepped inside, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He staggered toward the bathroom, avoiding his reflection until he had no choice but to face it. In the mirror, his battered face stared back at him, swollen cheekbones, split lip, and eyes shadowed with guilt. Jack's words echoed in his mind. You'll carry this little memory with you forever. After splashing cold water on his face and doing his best to mask the bruises, Bruce braced himself and headed to the kitchen. Bridget was sitting at the table, her laptop glowing in front of her, a steaming mug of tea in hand. Her gaze lifted, and the moment she saw him, her expression shifted from irritation to shock. What the hell happened to you? She demanded, standing so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Bruce hesitated, gripping the counter for support. There was an incident in the parking garage, he muttered. Bridget's eyes narrowed, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. An incident? Bruce, your face looks like you got hit by a truck. What kind of incident? He looked away, mumbling something unintelligible. Bruce, her tone sharpened, cutting through the haze of his exhaustion. Look at me. Reluctantly, he met her gaze. The concern in her eyes quickly hardened into suspicion. You're lying, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Whatever happened, you're not telling me the truth. Bruce sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the night. Can we not do this right now? I'm exhausted. No, we are doing this right now, she shot back, her voice rising. You come home looking like you've been in a bar fight, and I'm supposed to let it slide? What aren't you telling me, Bruce? His defenses crumbled. The shame, the fear, the futility, it all poured out in a single, quiet admission. I screwed up, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Bridget's expression darkened. What do you mean, you screwed up? He hesitated, then took a deep breath, as if confessing would somehow ease the burden. I had an affair, he admitted. It's over. It's done. But I got caught. The silence that followed was suffocating. Bridget stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, disbelief etched across her face. Then her features twisted, fury overtaking her shock. You had an affair? She hissed, her voice shaking with rage. With who? When? It doesn't matter, Bruce said weakly. It's over. It damn well does matter, she shouted, slamming her fist on the table. Who was it, Bruce? He hesitated again, but there was no escaping her demand. Carrie Hogan, he finally admitted, his voice cracking. Bridget blinked, stunned into silence. Jack Hogan's wife. Bruce nodded, his stomach churning. Bridget let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Well, that explains your face. I'm guessing Jack didn't take the news too kindly. You could say that, Bruce muttered, rubbing his bruised jaw. Bridget began pacing the kitchen, running her hands through her hair, her fury building with every step. Unbelievable. After everything I've done for this family, for you, you go and pull this crap? She stopped, glaring at him with cold contempt. You're pathetic, Bruce. He didn't argue. There was no defense, no justification. You know what? Bridget said, her voice icy. You're sleeping on the couch tonight. Tomorrow, we're having a long conversation about what happens next. And don't think for a second you're off the hook. In the weeks that followed, Bruce's life unraveled. At work, rumors spread like wildfire. Jack Hogan's company pulled their lucrative business from Hamilton and Ross, and Bruce's colleagues began to avoid him like a leper. By mid-January, The managing partner called him into the office and gave him an ultimatum: resign quietly or face public termination. He chose the former. At home, the fallout was just as devastating. Bridget filed for divorce within weeks, her lawyer demanding full custody of the kids and a significant portion of Bruce's dwindling assets. She was methodical in her wrath, ensuring he felt every ounce of her betrayal. As for Carrie, she vanished from his life entirely. Word had it Jack had made good on his threats, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back. Some said she fled south, far from Jack's reach, perhaps to Mexico or beyond. Bruce moved to another state, renting a dingy apartment on the outskirts of a city where no one knew his name. His career in ruins, his family shattered. He spent his days working low-level legal gigs and his nights haunted by the weight of his mistakes. Jack Hogan's words rang in his mind often. "If I ever have to see you again, you won't like what happens next." In the end, Bruce knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had underestimated the power of consequences. Jack hadn't just exacted revenge. He'd razed Bruce's life to the ground, leaving him to sift through the ashes of his own choices.